Some people are born with support, my son said on national television, smiling beneath the bright studio lights. I wasn't one of them. I remember the exact moment the coffee mug slipped from my hand. It didn't shatter. It just tipped sideways on the kitchen table, warm coffee spreading slowly across the wood, while I stared at the television screen like I was looking at a stranger wearing my son's face. Ryan sat there in his tailored navy suit with his hospital logo pinned proudly to his lapel, while the audience applauded his story about overcoming hardship alone. Alone. The word echoed in my head louder than the applause. I stood frozen in my little kitchen outside Columbus, Ohio, still wearing the pale blue cardigan I'd owned for nearly 12 years, the one with the loose thread near the sleeve cuff. The evening news glow filled the room in soft flickers while rain tapped quietly against the windows over my sink. Ryan looked polished now. Confident. Important. The kind of man people trusted the second he walked into a room. The TV host leaned forward with sympathetic eyes and asked him how he managed to survive medical school without family support. Ryan gave a soft laugh and shook his head. You learn early not to expect anyone to save you, he said. The audience murmured gently like he just shared something noble and heartbreaking. My chest tightened so suddenly I had to grip the counter beside me. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I had imagined the last 30 years of my life. Maybe I had imagined the overnight shifts at St. Mary's Hospital where I worked as a nurse until my feet swelled so badly I couldn't remove my shoes without crying. Maybe I imagined selling Harold's fishing boat 3 months after his funeral because Ryan's anatomy textbooks cost more than our mortgage payment. Maybe I imagined the second loan I took against our little house after Ryan called me one winter night from Boston saying he was thinking about dropping out because he couldn't afford tuition anymore. Don't you dare quit, I had told him while sitting in my car outside a 24-hour grocery store parking lot after my diner shift. You keep going. I'll figure it out. And I did figure it out. Somehow I always figured it out. I skipped meals sometimes. I wore the same winter coat for 9 years. I learned how to stretch canned soup into 3 dinners. But Ryan stayed in school. Ryan became Dr. Ryan Carter, the successful surgeon everyone admired now. On television, the host smiled warmly and called him a true self-made inspiration. Ryan nodded without hesitation. Not once did he mention me. Not once did he mention the woman who spent half her life making sure he never had to stop dreaming. The camera cut briefly to Vanessa sitting proudly in the audience beside the stage in a cream-colored dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She smiled the way she always did in photographs. Calm. Controlled. Perfect. I hadn't seen that smile in person for almost 8 months. The interview continued, but I barely heard the words anymore. I just kept staring at my son's face while something cold and heavy settled quietly inside me. Because the pain wasn't only that he lied. It was how easily he did it. Like erasing me had become natural. Like the world made more sense to him if I simply never existed at all. The television kept playing long after the interview ended, but I could not remember a single commercial that came afterward. I just stood there in my kitchen while the coffee slowly dripped off the edge of the table onto the linoleum floor. The clock above the stove read 9:14 p.m. outside. The rain had turned heavier, tapping steadily against the old gutters Harold used to promise he would replace before he got sick. Funny how grief changes shape over the years. At first you think losing your husband will be the hardest thing you survive. Then one day your own child looks into a television camera and acts like you never carried him through life with your bare hands. I finally grabbed a dish towel and wiped the table in silence. My hands were trembling, though I was not sure if it was anger or heartbreak anymore. Maybe both. I walked slowly toward the hallway closet and pulled down the faded cardboard storage box from the top shelf. The tape along the edges had yellowed with age. Ryan's handwriting still covered one side in. Black marker from years ago. Med school stuff. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it carefully. The smell of old paper and dust rose immediately into the air. Inside were decades of my life stacked in neat piles. Tuition statements. Bank receipts. Loan agreements. Birthday cards Ryan mailed home during his second year in Boston. I picked up one envelope with shaky fingers. The stamp was crooked. Typical Ryan. He always rushed small things when he was younger. Inside was a folded card with a cartoon stethoscope on the front. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Mom, it read. I know you are probably exhausted, Someday I am going to make all this worth it. I stared at those words for a long time. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet. I remembered the apartment Ryan rented during his first semester. Tiny. Cold. The radiator barely worked. I used to drive nearly 11 hours every few months just to bring him groceries because he never wanted to spend money eating properly. I would pack coolers full of casseroles, sandwich meat, fruit, soup containers. Sometimes I stayed only 2 hours before driving all the way home again because I had work the next morning. I never complained. Not once. Mothers from my generation did not keep score. We just gave. Quietly. Completely. Around 10 o'clock my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Ryan's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it without moving. The call rang until voicemail picked up. A minute later another buzz. This time a text message appeared. Hey Mom. Did you watch tonight? I looked at the words for several seconds. Then another message came through almost immediately. Crazy response online already. I could practically hear Vanessa typing those words beside him. Public relations had become her entire world after Ryan's career took off. She understood headlines better than emotions. Image better than memory. I set the phone face down on the table without replying. Then I reached deeper into the storage box and found the old mortgage paperwork from 23 years ago. The second loan. The one I took after Harold died because Ryan's tuition increased unexpectedly. My signature sat at the bottom of every page in blue ink. Evelyn Carter. Responsible party. I ran my thumb slowly over the faded signature, while something cold settled deeper inside my chest. Because for the first time in my life, I realized sacrifice means nothing once someone decides your story no longer fits theirs. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ryan sitting beneath those studio lights smiling like the past had been something he escaped instead of something that carried him. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up trying to rest and walked into the living room with a blanket around my shoulders. The house creaked softly the way old houses do when the temperature drops. Harold used to say homes settle like people after midnight. Quietly. Slowly. I sat in my recliner beside the lamp near the window and stared at the framed photographs lining the bookshelf. Ryan at 8 years old holding a plastic science fair ribbon. Ryan at 17 standing beside his beat-up Honda before leaving for college. Ryan in his white medical coat smiling so hard his eyes nearly disappeared. In every picture before Vanessa entered our lives he stood close to me, arm over my shoulders, hand resting against my back, like he was proud of where he came from. Somewhere along the way that changed. At first it happened gradually enough that I convinced myself it was normal. Ryan became busy during residency, then fellowship. Then the hospital offered him a partnership position in Chicago. Successful people had demanding schedules. I understood that better than most. But after he married Vanessa, something colder settled over everything. Family dinners became rarer. Phone calls became shorter. And whenever Ryan did call, it often sounded like he was reading from somewhere else entirely. We have been swamped lately, Mom. Things are crazy at the hospital. Vanessa and I are traveling next month. Always we. Always Vanessa and I. I remember the first time I noticed she never displayed photographs of me in their house. Ryan and Vanessa had invited me over for Christmas Eve about 4 years ago, after they bought their enormous place outside the city. White marble. Counters. Heated floors. One of those refrigerators with screens built into the doors. The whole place looked like something from a luxury magazine. While Vanessa prepared cocktails for guests, I wandered briefly through the hallway near the staircase. Framed photographs covered the walls. Ryan receiving awards. Ryan and Vanessa in Italy. Ryan beside famous surgeons at conferences. Ryan laughing on a yacht somewhere in Florida. There were even photographs of Vanessa's parents displayed in silver frames along the console table. But there was not a single picture of me anywhere in that house. Not one. I remember standing there staring at those walls while Christmas music floated softly from hidden ceiling speakers. Such a small thing. But it stayed with me afterward longer than I expected. A few months later, Ryan appeared in a hospital magazine profile. Vanessa mailed me a copy herself. "You will be so proud," she wrote inside the envelope. I sat at my kitchen table reading the article twice. The reporter described Ryan as a self-made success who rose from hardship through discipline and determination. There was an entire paragraph about how he had no meaningful support system growing up. No mention of me. No mention of Harold. No mention of the woman who spent 30 years working double shifts so he could sit inside operating rooms saving lives. I told myself maybe reporters exaggerate things. Maybe Ryan never saw the wording before publication. But deep down I think part of me already knew. That same summer, I overheard Vanessa speaking to someone during a charity luncheon. She did not know I was standing nearby near the dessert table. Ryan connects better with audiences when his story feels independent, she said casually. People love resilience. Independent. I stood there holding a paper plate with cheesecake. I suddenly could not eat while those words settled heavily into my chest. Because I finally understood something painful that night. My son had not simply forgotten my sacrifices. He had started editing me out of his life on purpose. The next morning, the interview clip was everywhere. I saw it before I even finished pouring my coffee. Ryan's face filled my phone screen while headlines praised his unbelievable rise from nothing. One article called him the surgeon who beat impossible odds without family help. Another described him as proof that determination mattered more than privilege. Thousands of strangers shared the video online like it was some inspirational masterpiece. I sat alone at my kitchen table scrolling silently while sunlight pushed weakly through the curtains. The radiator hummed softly behind me. Outside, a garbage truck rattled down the street while ordinary people started ordinary mornings completely unaware that my entire life had just been rewritten by my own son. I made the mistake of opening the comments section. That was where the real damage lived. Parents like his usually hold people back. Good for him for escaping toxic family dynamics. Nobody succeeds alone except people who are truly special. I kept reading even though every sentence felt heavier than the last. One woman wrote, "As a mother, I cannot imagine failing my child so badly." I stared at that comment until the words blurred together. Failed him. The irony almost made me laugh. I remembered standing inside discount grocery stores counting dollar bills before checkout so Ryan could afford exam prep courses. I remembered wrapping my own arthritis medication in half doses to make prescriptions last longer, because his rent had increased unexpectedly one winter. Failure was not the word for what I had done. Sacrifice was. But sacrifice is invisible once the people benefiting from it decide silence serves them better. Around noon my phone rang again. This time it was my sister Diane from Cincinnati. I already knew why she was calling before I answered. "Evelyn," she said carefully. "I saw Ryan's interview last night." Her voice softened slightly. "Are you all right?" I looked down at the old wood grain on my kitchen table before answering. "I do not know yet," I admitted quietly. Diane sighed heavily. "You know, people online are talking about it everywhere now. Carol from church called me this morning asking if things were difficult when Ryan was young." Shame crept slowly into my chest then. Not because I had done something wrong, but because strangers were now discussing my motherhood like it had become public entertainment. Diane lowered her voice. "Did Vanessa put him up to this?" I thought about that question for a long moment. Vanessa never forced Ryan to say anything directly. That was what made her so effective. She simply polished certain truths while quietly removing others. Like editing photographs until only the version she preferred remained. "I think Ryan wanted the world to admire him," I said finally. And Vanessa understood how to package the story. After we hung up, I walked into the hallway and stopped beside the old framed photo near the staircase. It was taken the summer Ryan graduated from medical school. He stood in his cap and gown with one arm wrapped tightly around me while tears streamed down my face. We looked exhausted in that picture. Proud to. Back then Ryan still looked at me like I mattered. I touched the edge of the frame gently before returning to the kitchen. Another notification appeared on my phone. Vanessa had posted a professionally edited clip from the interview on social media. The caption read, "Proof that resilience creates greatness." Thousands of likes poured in beneath it. I stared at her words while something inside me shifted quietly into place. Because for the first time since the interview aired, I stopped feeling confused. This was not an accident. It was not careless wording. It was a carefully constructed story. And somehow, somewhere along the way, my son had agreed to become the main character in a version of life where his mother no longer existed. 3 days after the interview aired, I stopped by Miller's pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication. The weather had turned colder overnight, and the wind coming off the parking lot carried that sharp October chill that settles into your bones faster once you pass 70. I pulled my coat tighter as I walked inside. The automatic door slid open with a soft mechanical sigh, and warm air carrying the smell of floor cleaner and coffee drifted toward me. I had barely stepped into the greeting card aisle when I heard someone call my name. Mrs. Carter? I turned slowly and recognized Daniel Whitmore standing near the photo counter. For a second I almost did not place him. He looked older now, thinner around the face, his hair mostly gray. But then he smiled politely and I remembered. Daniel had worked in media production years ago. Ryan introduced us once during a hospital fundraiser before everything became so polished and controlled around him. I was not sure it was you, Daniel said as he approached. How have you been? I have been all right, I answered automatically, though we both knew that was not entirely true. Daniel shifted awkwardly for a moment before lowering his voice. I actually worked on Ryan's interview last week. My stomach tightened instantly. Oh, I said quietly. He glanced toward the front register, almost like he was making sure nobody nearby could overhear us. I debated whether I should say anything, he admitted. But after watching the final broadcast, something about it did not sit right with me. I remained silent. Years of nursing taught me people usually reveal more when you let silence breathe. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck uneasily. The original interview was different. Those 5 words landed heavier than I expected. Different how? I asked carefully. He hesitated before answering. Ryan talked about you several times during filming. Actually, he became emotional at one point. My fingers tightened slightly around my purse strap. Daniel continued quietly. He told a story about you driving overnight through a snowstorm to bring him groceries during medical school, because he could not afford food after paying tuition. I stared at him without blinking. For a moment I could almost see it again. The old Buick sliding carefully through icy Ohio roads while casserole dishes rattled softly in coolers beside me. Daniel sighed heavily. None of that made it into the final segment. The pharmacy speakers overhead played soft country music, while people moved casually through aisles around us completely unaware that my entire world had just tilted sideways again. Who removed it? I asked. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Your daughter-in-law requested revisions during post-production. There it was. Simple. Clean. Surgical. He continued speaking carefully, almost apologetically. Vanessa said the focus needed to stay on Ryan's independent journey. She thought family details weakened the branding angle. Branding angle. I repeated those words silently inside my head, while something cold settled deeper into my chest. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small business card. I probably should not be telling you this, he admitted quietly, but I kept a backup copy of the raw footage before editing. My heartbeat slowed strangely then. Not faster. Slower. Like some part of me had finally stopped panicking and started understanding. Daniel slid the card gently into my hand. If you want it, he said softly, call me. Then he gave me one last sympathetic look before walking toward the automatic doors and disappearing into the gray afternoon outside. I stood motionless beside the greeting cards for several seconds after he left. Around me life continued normally. Shopping carts rolled past. A child cried near the candy aisle. Somewhere in the store, a cashier laughed at something a customer said. But inside me something had shifted permanently. Because until that moment, part of me still wanted to believe Ryan had simply made a terrible mistake. Now I understood the truth was far uglier than that. My son had told the truth once, and someone had deliberately erased it afterward. That evening I finally called Daniel. The sun had already disappeared behind the trees outside my kitchen window, leaving the house wrapped in that dim blue darkness that always arrives too early in late October. I sat at the table with Harold's old reading glasses beside me, and the cardboard box of Ryan's school records spread across the surface like evidence from another lifetime. Daniel answered on the second ring. Mrs. Carter, he said quietly, almost like he expected me to call. I was wondering if you would. I looked down at the tuition receipts beneath my hands before speaking. I want to see the footage. There was a brief silence on the line. All right, he replied carefully. But I think you should prepare yourself first. The next afternoon I drove downtown to a small production office tucked between a dry cleaner and an insurance agency. Rain misted softly against the windshield the entire drive. The building itself looked ordinary from outside. Beige brick. Faded awning. Nothing glamorous. Not at all like the polished television world Vanessa loved so much. Daniel met me in the lobby carrying a paper cup of coffee and wearing the same uneasy expression from the pharmacy. "Thank you for coming," he said gently. I followed him down a narrow hallway into a small editing room filled with computer monitors and tangled cables. The air smelled faintly like dust and electronics. Daniel pulled out a chair for me beside one of the screens. "The network archived the original files before revisions," he explained quietly. "I saved a copy because honestly, I thought the original version felt more human." Human. Such a simple word. Yet somehow that was exactly what had been removed from Ryan's story. Daniel clicked the mouse and the interview began playing on the screen. There was Ryan beneath the studio lights again. Calm. Polished. Perfect. But this version was different almost immediately. His voice sounded softer somehow. Less rehearsed. The host asked him how he survived the financial pressure of medical school. Ryan smiled faintly and looked down for a second before answering. "Honestly, my mother carried me through most of it." My breath caught so sharply it hurt. Daniel remained silent beside me while the footage continued. Ryan talked about my nursing shifts. About Harold's death. About the second mortgage on our house. There were nights my mother slept in her car between jobs because she was trying to keep me in school, he admitted quietly on screen. Everything I have exists because she refused to give up on me. Tears burned behind my eyes then, but I still did not cry. I just sat perfectly still while the truth I thought had disappeared forever played across that monitor in front of me. The host even asked Ryan what he admired most about me. Ryan laughed softly before answering. "Her dignity," he said. "She never made me feel guilty for the sacrifices she made." I closed my eyes, briefly at those words. Because somewhere inside this carefully manufactured stranger on television, my son had once still existed. Daniel paused the video after another few minutes and turned toward me carefully. "The final revisions came directly from Vanessa's office," he explained quietly. "She requested anything involving family support be removed to strengthen the independent success angle." I stared at the frozen image of Ryan on the monitor. "Did Ryan know?" I asked softly. Daniel hesitated too long before answering. "That silence told me everything." "He approved the final cut before airing," he admitted at last. The room felt strangely still after that. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just still. Like the final piece of a puzzle settling into place. I looked at my son's frozen face on the screen for several long seconds before speaking again. "Can you send me a copy?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I think you deserve to have it." And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, something inside me stopped breaking. Because heartbreak is one thing, but clarity is something else entirely. The invitation arrived 4 days later in a thick cream-colored envelope with gold lettering across the front. I found it tucked inside my mailbox beneath grocery coupons and a utility bill. The Chicago Medical Excellence Foundation Annual Gala, it read in elegant script. Dr. Ryan Carter would be receiving the Humanitarian Leadership Award. Black tie requested. I stood in my kitchen turning the invitation slowly between my fingers while late afternoon sunlight stretched across the counter. For a moment I almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. Humanitarian leadership. The words felt strangely hollow now. At the bottom of the invitation, beneath the ballroom address and event details, was a handwritten note in Vanessa's perfect cursive. "We would love for you to attend this special evening. Ryan is so excited." Excited. I stared at that word for several seconds before setting the invitation down beside the stack of mortgage documents still sitting on my table. 2 days earlier I might have refused immediately. I might have curled deeper into my grief and hidden quietly inside my little house while the world celebrated a version of my son that no longer felt real. But something had changed since watching the original footage in Daniel's office. Pain still existed, of course. Some wounds do not disappear simply because the truth becomes clearer. But confusion had vanished completely. I finally understood what had happened to my story. It had been managed, trimmed, polished into something more useful for public admiration. And somehow that realization steadied me instead of destroying me. That evening, I opened the hallway closet and removed the old navy blue dress bag hanging near the back. The zipper stuck halfway down before finally loosening with a sharp tug. Inside hung the dark emerald gown I wore to Ryan's medical school graduation dinner nearly 15 years earlier. Simple, elegant, timeless. I ran my hand lightly over the fabric while memories drifted quietly through me. Ryan hugging me outside the auditorium afterward. Harold's old gold watch around Ryan's wrist because he wanted Dad there somehow. Back then success still felt shared between us. I held the dress against myself in the bedroom mirror and realized it still fits surprisingly well. Age changes many things, but grief has a way of preserving certain shapes inside a person. The following morning Ryan called again. This time I answered. "Mom," he said warmly, though something nervous lingered beneath his voice. "I have been trying to reach you all week." I looked out the kitchen window toward the bird feeder swaying softly in the wind before answering. "I know." A brief silence followed. "Did you get the gala invitation?" he asked carefully. "I did." Another pause. I could almost picture Vanessa standing nearby listening closely. "I really hope you come," Ryan continued. "It would mean a lot." I closed my eyes for a moment at the sound of his voice. There were still traces of the boy I raised hidden beneath the polished confidence. That was the hardest part. Loving someone who had slowly learned how to erase you without completely becoming cruel. "I will be there," I said calmly. Ryan sounded relieved instantly. "Good," he replied quickly. "That is good." Neither of us mentioned the interview. Neither of us mentioned the lies. We spoke for less than 4 minutes before hanging up. Afterward, I walked back to the kitchen table and opened the folder Daniel had given me. Inside rested a flash drive containing the unedited footage, along with printed transcripts from the original interview. Beside them sat decades of receipts, letters, tuition statements, and photographs documenting every sacrifice Ryan once publicly acknowledged before someone decided those truths no longer matched the image they wanted to sell. I looked at the pile quietly for a long time. Then I began organizing everything carefully into a single leather portfolio. Not because I wanted revenge. That was the strange part. I no longer felt angry enough for revenge. What I wanted now was much simpler than that. I wanted the truth to stand in the same room as the lie. The ballroom ceiling glittered with crystal chandeliers so bright they almost hurt my eyes when I first stepped inside. Waiters moved silently through the crowd carrying trays of champagne, while a jazz quartet played softly near the stage beneath golden lights. Everything smelled expensive. Fresh flowers, perfume, polished wood. I stood near the entrance for a moment holding my leather portfolio against my side, while people in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos laughed around me like life had always treated them kindly. No one recognized me at first. That surprised me less than it should have. Mothers disappear easily in rooms built to celebrate successful sons. Then Ryan saw me from across the ballroom. I watched his expression shift almost instantly from surprise to relief as he excused himself from a group of surgeons and hurried toward me. "Mom," he said warmly, kissing my cheek. "You came." He looked handsome in his black tuxedo. Older than the boy I raised, of course, but still carrying traces of him around the eyes. "I said I would," I answered calmly. Vanessa appeared seconds later, elegant as always in a silver evening gown that caught the light every time she moved. "Evelyn," she said smoothly, leaning in for a brief air kiss that never quite touched my skin. "You look beautiful tonight." I thanked her politely. Up close, I noticed tension behind her smile. Tiny things. The stiffness around her mouth. The quick glance toward the leather portfolio beneath my arm. She always noticed details immediately. That was what made her dangerous. Ryan rested his hand lightly against my shoulder. "I am really glad you are here," he said softly. And for one painful second I almost believed him completely. The gala continued around us in waves of applause and polished speeches. Doctors received awards. Wealthy donors toasted innovation and leadership. Large screens displayed photographs of Ryan visiting children's hospitals and speaking at medical conferences around the country. Everywhere I looked, there was the carefully crafted version of my son the world adored. Strong, compassionate, self-made. Around 9 o'clock, The master of ceremonies finally stepped onto the stage and announced Ryan's award presentation. The ballroom erupted into applause as Ryan adjusted his jacket and walked confidently toward the podium beneath the lights. I watched him from my table near the back while waiters quietly cleared dessert plates around me. Ryan smiled graciously as the audience settled. "Thank you," he began warmly. "Receiving this honor means more to me than I can properly explain." His voice filled the ballroom smoothly, practiced and controlled. He spoke about perseverance, discipline, long nights during residency, sacrifice. Then came the line I already knew was coming. "When you grow up without much support," Ryan continued carefully, "you learn early that survival depends entirely on your own determination." A few people nodded sympathetically around the room. Somewhere nearby, someone even murmured, "Remarkable." I lowered my eyes briefly toward the portfolio resting on my lap. For a moment, I heard Harold's voice in my memory from years ago. "Truth does not need to shout, Evie. It only needs to stand still long enough." Ryan continued speaking while applause rose again around him. Then the master of ceremonies smiled warmly and said, "Dr. Carter, before we conclude tonight, I understand there is someone very special here who helped shape your journey." Ryan's expression shifted instantly. Just slightly, but enough. His eyes found me near the back of the ballroom as the spotlight slowly turned toward my table. Hundreds of strangers looked in my direction all at once. Vanessa went perfectly still beside the stage. I rose carefully from my chair, smoothing the front of my emerald gown with steady hands. The ballroom fell strangely quiet as I began walking slowly toward the stage carrying the leather portfolio against my side. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor beneath the chandeliers overhead, while Ryan watched me approach with an expression I could no longer fully read. Fear perhaps, shame maybe, or simply the realization that some truths refuse to stay buried forever. I stopped beside the podium and looked out across the ballroom for a long moment before speaking. Hundreds of faces stared back at me beneath the crystal lights. Some curious, some impatient, some already uncomfortable without understanding why. Ryan stood only a few feet away now, frozen beside the microphone with one hand still resting against the edge of the podium. Vanessa remained near the front table, her expression perfectly controlled except for the tightness gathering around her eyes. I placed the leather portfolio carefully on the podium between us. "Good evening," I said calmly. My voice echoed softly through the ballroom speakers. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I am Ryan's mother." The room remained silent. Somewhere near the back, a glass clinked softly against silverware before the sound disappeared completely. I turned slightly toward Ryan and for a brief second I saw something fragile flicker across his face. Not anger. Something sadder than that. Fear perhaps. Or regret arriving too late. "I was very proud watching my son's interview on television last week," I continued quietly. "Especially the original version." Vanessa's posture stiffened immediately. Ryan looked down. I opened the portfolio slowly and removed several papers held neatly together with a small gold clip. Tuition receipts, loan statements, mortgage documents, decades of sacrifices flattened into ordinary pieces of paper. "I did not come tonight to embarrass anyone," I said softly. "And I certainly did not come here asking for gratitude. Parents do not spend their lives loving their children, so they can be applauded afterward." Several people lowered their eyes then. The ballroom felt smaller somehow, more human. I reached into the portfolio again and removed a single folded page. "But I believe truth matters," I said, "especially when it is edited into something more convenient." Then I unfolded the paper carefully. Ryan recognized it instantly. I could see it in his face before I even spoke the words aloud. "This is a letter my son wrote me during his second year of medical school." My hands remained steady as I read. "Mom, I know you are exhausted. Someday I am going to make all this worth it. I would be nothing without you." Silence spread across the ballroom so completely that even the musicians near the stage had stopped moving. Ryan stared at the floor now. Vanessa's expression had gone pale beneath the ballroom lights. I reached once more into the portfolio and removed the flash drive Daniel gave me. "There was also another version of Ryan's interview," I continued quietly. "One where he spoke honestly about the people who carried him through difficult years. The master of ceremonies shifted awkwardly beside us. "Mrs. Carter," he began nervously, but I smiled gently and shook my head. "Do not worry," I said softly. "I am almost finished." Then I turned toward Ryan fully for the first time all evening. Up close he suddenly looked tired. Older somehow. Like maintaining the lie had cost him more than he expected. "I never needed public credit for loving you," I told him quietly. "But hearing the world praise your strength while you erased my existence was a different kind of grief." Ryan's eyes filled instantly then. He opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, but no words came out. And strangely, I realized I did not need them anymore. I closed the portfolio gently and stepped away from the podium. "The truth does not disappear simply because someone edits the footage," I said softly into the silence. "Eventually it waits for its moment to stand back up." Then I turned and walked away from the stage beneath the chandeliers while no one in that ballroom said a single word. Behind me the applause never came. And somehow that silence felt more honest than any standing ovation.